Jaina system of education. According to B.A. Saleto, the history of Jainism in southern India is primarily the history of that religion in Karnataka. It is true that in Karnataka Jainism was a more popular religion from early 2nd century to the end of the 14th century AD. In this period several rulers of various dynasties and their officers patronaged this religion, Jaina monks and educational centers. An inscription from Kuppach tells us that Jainism had spread throughout Karnataka. During this period the Jainas played an important role in spreading education in Kanasika. To begin with, Kaityalayas and Bastis were religious centers, but soon they attracted students and also became educational centers. Centers. B. Important characteristics of the Jaina system of education. A. Jainism classes in society. Denounces caste system or any hierarchy of, hence, Jainism believed in universal education. Through the mother tongue, perhaps a consequent of its denouncement of caste system in society. 2. The Jaina acharyas always used the language of the masses as the medium of instruction. 3. The system of co-education and women's education were the other important aspects. C. Centers of learning. While temples, ghatikas, agraharas, brahmapuris, and mathas were centers Brahminic education, the Bashtis, also called Chatyafayas and Jinalayas, played a prominent role as centers of Jaina system of education and the Jaina tradition. Earlier, the Acharya were not confined to any particular place, but they moved from one place to another, but later, Bashtis and Mathas, asramas were constructed for the Jain Munis and Acharyas. They became the centers of learning. Kings, queens and other members of royal families gave support to these centers of learning, and some of them became very famous. The inscriptions mention different names for Bashtis, like Bashti, Koyil Bashti, Tu Chatyale, Jinalaya, etc. Several Bashtis were named after the Tirthankaras, for example, Niminatha Bashti, Paraswanatha Besed 1, 2 Santinatha Bashti at Raibaga, Kandgal and Belgaum respectively. Sometimes, basadis were named after the builders. An inscription dated 1138 AD from Sravanabelagola states that the Chatyale built by Bopanna in the place was named after him. Similarly, in Sravanabelagola, Santala, the chief queen of Hoysala Vishnuvardhana, built a Bishti named her as Saviti _ Gandhavarana Jinalaya, and also she made a grant for the worship and feeding the ascetics there. Another inscription from Chamarajanagar tells us that a certain Niravedya built Niravedya Jinalaya there. The Chalukya king Ganga Permadi constructed Permadi Jinalaya at Balagame Nagagonda. The village headman of Nidoni built the Nagagonda Bashti at Nidoni, in Bijapur district. These Bashtis were great centers of learning. This becomes clear from what Nyasena has written in his Dharmamrita. King Arimathena knew that if he sent his son to a Bashti, he would become learned and intelligent. There are instances to show that Jaina teachers taught not only in the Bashtis, but also in their own houses. It is known from an inscription from Lakshmeshwar dated 730 AD which states that Udayadeva Pandita taught his disciple of Pujapada at his own house, for which donations were made by Chalukya king Jaisimha. From the story of Sukumaraswamy found in Vadaradhane, we learn that Suryamitra kept Agnibhati and Vayubhuti, sons of Kashyap, in his own house and taught them without expecting anything in return. We also find therein that Suryamitra, who was seated on an metal seat, Lohasana, and teaching his pupils when Agnibhuti and Vayubhuti went to his house. This itself is a sufficient proof to show that education was given by the Jaina teachers in their own houses, just as it was done by Hindu teachers. Inscriptions clearly indicate that there was a Bashti in almost every village in Karnataka, as Jainism, Koppalar and Sravanabelagola were the most famous centers of education. D. Commencement of education. According to Vedic tradition, Hindus began their education after the initiation or Upanena ritual. The Jaina students had to begin their study at the age of 5 or a little later. Before going to the teacher's house, a student had to worship Jaina. The Jana Chandra Karite of Payana describes the education of Janana Chandra as follows: after 5 years, he worshipped the Jaina and started to write the Siddhamatrika with great wisdom, sitting at the holy feet of his supreme Guru. Varushavedgalu Jina Pujiyamadi Varagurugal Samspadlu Guruvanu Siddhamatrake Visadiyoluta Bardanu Bahujanmeyendu. Another Jaina work, Dharmamrita, tells us that Vajrakumara began his education at the age of 5. The passage runs thus. Bami Kamaidu Varushadandu Janpadya Yara Samipadaludalikuvaduantu. A. Teachers. The Jaina teachers are commonly referred to as Tamadi. Oja, Upadhyaya, 2 Guruvadi, 3 Acharya, Goravi, 5 Bhattarka, Gurugalu. Gu. Inscriptions do not enable us to understand differences, if any, in these reference made regarding teachers. The Rayapasiniya Sutta, a North Indian work in Sanskrit, divides the teachers into 3 categories, viz. A. CE 1. Kalacharya and Acharya of Arts and Science. 2. Shilpacharya and Acharya of Art and Architecture. And 3. Dharmacharya and Acharya of Religion and Theology. Registered Tuara. F. Students. The male students were called Antevasi, Mani, 10 Gudda. The women students were called Guddiyo Sishye. Sishya, Vidyarthi, Kanti or Gants. The Jaina teachers expected their students to live in their houses, to be endowed with enthusiasm, possess thirst for knowledge, soft speech and good conduct. G. Strength of A classes. It seems that there was no strict rule regarding the number of students studying under a teacher. The teacher could take as many students as possible for him to teach. The number ranged from 28 to 300 students under the control of a single teacher. An inscription dated 1100 AD from Sravanabelagola tells us that Chaturmukha, a Jaina teacher, had 84 students. Another record of the same place mentions that there were 300 students under Gunanandi Pandita. The students were well versed in the Tarka, Vyakarana, Sahitya, Agama and debates. A record dated 1118 AD mentions that Kanika Srikanti had 28 students. Had 28 students. H. The teaching method. SBDO states that the method of Jaina teaching was scientific and it comprised of 5 important parts, viz. 1. Vachana, reading. 2. Prachana, asking questions. 3. Anupreksha, pondering over. Am I, learning by part, and Dharmapalesa, preaching of religion to masses. 5. Debate and discussion method was also used for teaching. The Sravanabelagola inscription mentions a Kalinka, who was a famous Jaina preceptor and who is said to have defeated the Buddhist monk in a disputation at the court of King Himasitala of Kanchi. Another inscription of the same place records that Devakirti Pandita bad outbeaten the Charvakas, Bodhas, Nyayikas, Kapalikas and Vasesikas and others. 1. Relation between the teacher and the students. On the basis of the Uttaradhyayana, H.B. Jain says that the relation between the teacher and the students was cordial and modest. He further says that just as a rider was happy in driving a good horse, so also a teacher was delighted in educating a good pupil, and just as a rider was tired in driving a bad horse, so also a teacher lost interest in imparting knowledge to a silly pupil. If the teacher was angry, it was duty of the pupil to make him happy by his affection, to honor him with folded hands and to assure him not to commit any fault in future. In epigraphs we come across students referred to as Antevasinar and Chhatra. This shows that both the teacher and the pupils lived near each other and under the same roof. This automatically resulted in a close relationship between the teacher and pupils as that between the father and his children. In the Vadaradhane, referred to earlier, Agnibhuti and Vayubhuti, sons of Kashyapi, lived in Suryamitra's house for a period of 8 years and studied all subjects.